Perhaps if you're going to a rather crowded place, you're not really experiencing the best of Japan.
This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 314 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It is a deep dive interview with Paul Christie, the CEO of Walk Japan. Before I begin, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast. So I had a fabulous chat with Walk Japan's CEO, Paul Christie. It's about his career, but also we talked a lot about doing good, I guess, and this is particularly interesting to me because I think when we travel, it seems really clear if we're visiting a country with a poorer economy, it seems like doing good seems kind of obvious. It's still absolutely fraught with dangers and ways to do it badly, but it seems kind of obvious. But what about somewhere like Japan? We think of Japan as an economically really strong country. So what can we do to do good? I think if you've listened to my episode about my travels in Fukushima, episode 310, you'll already have some ideas from that about, supporting a region that needs it. And Walk Japan has a really similar focus and has had for many, many years, focusing on revitalising rural and remote parts of Japan. So we will talk about that in some depth. Now, my upfront disclaimer is a big thank you to Walk Japan who invited me on this walk, which means they covered my costs. But my opinions are, of course, 100% my own. And you won't be surprised to hear that I loved all of this chat because it's very well aligned with thoughtful travel. I started off by asking Paul, who is originally from the UK, about how and why he came to Japan and how he came to love Japan.
I think in my particular case, I was just very fortunate. I went back to uni to do studies, and then I came to Japan, ended up on a homestay in Kawagoe, which is just outside of sort of northwest Tokyo. I ended up with this family who didn't speak English. And the second day I was there was the 13th. I arrived on the 12th of August, 1987. And on the second day I was there was Grandma's Day. And Grandma's Day was open house in this family. They'd have anything up to 60 people through the house, starting about midday, going on to midnight and beyond. And basically, that was my beginning of my career in Japan. Was the second, basically, still a jet lag. This big party, good chat, lots of beer, sake. Of course, I didn't understand things very well. I could read better than I could speak when I first arrived in Japan. And these people didn't speak English, and they just sort of opened the door and said, "Hello, fellow human being, come in." And then it just went from there. They said, "You need a car?" I was wondering around the back. After dinner, you got any plans? And I knew I hadn't. And so they said, "Well, do you want to go out for another one?" I said, "All right." And some days we come back at the crack of dawn. Other days we come back maybe late at night and then continue on until the crack of dawn and talking about all sorts of stuff. I'm in Japan for the first time. It was like, why do the Japanese do that? Why don't they do it the British way? It's obviously much better, much more practical. Why?
Oh, there's so many questions when you arrive in Japan. It's like being a toddler again, isn't it?
And my big mate from his family, he was about 12 years older than I was, so he would have been mid to latest 30s at the time. Instead of saying, "Well, we're Japanese, what do you expect?" He said, "Oh, that's an interesting question. Let's think about that." And we just had a great time. It really was like fellow human being, rather than you and I, or them and us, or anything like that. I was only going to be there for 1 year. Right, they ended up as 2. Then the visa as a language student ran out, so I had to return to the UK. But as soon as I could, I was back in Japan, which was within about 16 months. And I went back to the homestay family, and they knew I was going to arrive. And this maybe explains the sort of connection we built up. And so I sort of got out my taxi with my bags, went to the front door. Nobody bothered to open the front door. And in Japanese house, just going up into somebody's house in the countryside is not unusual. But they'd already started the party. I was like, "Come on, the beers are, where the beers are, bring one over and sit down with us." They were an hour into the party. Welcome party. Paul hadn't even arrived yet.
Oh, but that's so lovely. That's the best welcome of all.
Right, Paul, you're nothing special, but because you're coming, we're having a party. I know there's an image of the Japanese, which is maybe a bit. There was an image that the Japanese all do the same thing. They operate in the same way. They all look left together, they all look right together. Well, sometimes it can be a bit like that, but we can all be a bit like that, regardless of our nationality, depending on the occasion. But actually, the Japanese are some of the biggest party people I've ever met.
As you talk, I immediately think of some of the Japanese friends I spent most time with when I was living in Japan, and that's exactly true. But also, like from a tourist perspective, often people have those experiences where they feel exceedingly welcomed, like almost excessively welcomed by the Japanese. And sometimes it's almost uncomfortable because, you know, people will go out of their way to be so helpful and so kind. And from our culture, like I think Australian and British cultures are probably similar in this regard, we don't really know what to do with that because we're not like that. We're not opening up our homes to people.
Well, it's a different social, if you like, contract, if you like, with others. We have a different understanding of how we operate with each other. And to tell you the truth, in the cities, it doesn't necessarily happen. Partly maybe the homes are smaller, or they live in an apartment, or, you know, it's just convenient to, you know, they're used to eating outside. But in the more rural areas, you know, opening the house up, especially those people with a bigger house, it's easy. It doesn't mean that they do it all the time, but many do. And I just happened to land on my feet with this family. I mean, talk about serendipity, you know, looking back on it, that was new.
So you have worked with Walk Japan for some decades as well, right?
Since 1997, I was in London at the time working in TV, news and documentary with Japanese companies. So I was working out of their London, usually European sort of main office. But during that time, I was asked by someone I knew who was connected with Walk Japan if I'd like to be a tour leader, as we call them, a guide.
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh, that's nice. Yeah, I can be flight paid out to Japan and back. That'd be nice. And I'd take a small pay cut to lead the tours. I don't mind that because I like going to Japan. And then at the end of leading two tours along the Nakasendo Way, our first and at that time only tour, I'd go off, I'd finish in Tokyo and, you know, go to the headquarters of the various TV companies I was working with and go back with fistful more work in the TV business. So it all worked out very, very well. Yeah, so that was 1997. Then in 2002, I decided to move back to Japan and then fulfill a long-held dream of living the good life in the countryside. As a teenager, I loved going to my grandfather's house in the Kentish countryside, surrounded by hop fields and orchards, helping him out with his honeybees. And when I determined that one day I'd like to have a similar life, at the age of 40, I thought, now's the time to do it. Otherwise, I probably won't achieve what I want to achieve, not knowing really what I wanted to achieve. Anyway, so I came to where we are now, this back of beyond place in Kyushu called the Kunisaki Peninsula, which I'd never heard of. But so I bought my first hillside and started to pitch my tent and started doing my thing, tidying the place up because it was a bit of a mess after it had been logged out, and helping the neighbours with their paddy fields, harvesting the rice, planting the rice, generally cutting the grass.
Did you have any knowledge about this stuff beyond like your childhood experiences, or?
I lived in the urban area, London. I went to uni in London as well as working in the TV business in London. So no, not really. About the same time I moved here, I took over running Walk Japan, which is going through a bit of an idea. The company had, this is really the days before the internet had really taken off. So most of our work, a small travel company couldn't really do it on its own. So we were working with a big British backpacking organisation. We were the most expensive tour in their catalogue. This is the furthest way to Britain practically, except for Australasia or South America, something like that. And it was considered an expensive destination. And I was very close to one of the partners. There's a British guy and an American guy who set the company up in Hong Kong. They were both at the time in Hong Kong University in 1992. And they always accepted what I suggested. And so I said to them, well, why don't you make me a partner and let me run the business, because you two are too busy with the academic work. Yeah, and at that time, it's just me, really, for about 6 months, doing customer service, booking accommodation, leading the tours. And I just did it to earn a bit of pocket money. You don't need a lot of money to live in the Japanese countryside. You didn't need it then. You don't need it that much now.
Mm-hmm.
But it just started to grow and grow and grow and grow. So what I set out to do on a personal level, sort of live the good life, which is, grow your own veggies, build your own place to live in, have your own little forest or woodland, help the neighbours and all that sort of stuff, became something I was less than less able to do because I was more and more busy with Walk Japan. So in 2011, just before the tsunami hit Japan, we officially made it Walk Japan's community project.
Right.
And took on one person full-time, and we had a couple of people part-time working on it. And that became what it is today, which is quite multifaceted. It's farming, mainly rice, shiitake, mushroom growing.
Right.
We have small patches of like blueberry fields and a few other things like that. We grew for the first time wheat last year, only on a small scale, but organic. And then we take over empty properties. When I say take over, we're not squatting, buy them.
Buy them in.
And most people are very happy to sell them because there's nobody who wants to buy them. There's anything between 8 and 11 million empty properties. I don't know if that's just residential or includes other properties as well.
In Japan.
I think it's more
they
have a census every 4 or 5 years or so. This sort of thing.
Are there empty properties because people have moved out to the city, or like young people don't stay, or what's kind of going on there?
Well, I think there's a number of factors. One is, for a long time, when I first arrived in Japan, it was like countryside bad, city good. That was the overwhelming story. That has completely changed now, partly because an idea of, well, you shouldn't discriminate. It was, laugh at the yokel speaking, a dialect. That's how it was in Japan when I first arrived. That doesn't happen. It's quite different. But also there is a different attitude towards the countryside. But in the past, even now, a lot of local younger people, they want to move out. And it could be for a number of reasons. They want to explore the city, as I did. I came from a fairly small seaside town in North Kent. So I can understand that from a personal perspective, why young people want to move out. But also, there's not much opportunity often in the countryside in Japan to maybe develop skills and use English, for example, maybe, or that's changing now with the growth of inbound tourism. And also declining population. Japan's population, I think last year, dropped, and it's been dropping for 10 years, and each year the number increases. And I think last year was anything up to 500,000 drop in the population of Japan.
Right.
It reached a peak about 10 years ago of about 126.5 million people, I think. I think we're down to close to under 125 million.
Yeah, right. Wow. And so an aging population as well, obviously.
And it's an aging population, absolutely. So there's a number of things that are happening that cause property in the countryside to fall by the wayside. There isn't demand for it. But we're hoping to change that by showing how it can be used. This house that I'm speaking from now was empty for a number of years. We took it over and renovated it as a family home. Nearby, we have 2 buildings which are offices for our company, and we have places people stay in, visitors to stay in. In fact, one of them, and we had the British ambassador, and her husband came and stayed a few months ago.
Wow, that's cool.
We're making waves. What else do we do? We have forests. We've got forests galore. A lot of it's plantation, but we're slowly, I can't do it in my lifetime, but I'm going to get rid of it and slowly regenerate it in a more natural forested fashion. Whether we can rewild it is another matter. I mean, we just, after gestation period, because of COVID being well over 3 or 4 years, we now have our English teachers. So we brought English tuition to the village.
That's cool.
This will work in parallel with the local school. We don't want to compete with the local school, but they can't do what we can do by introducing the system, having our own teacher. And I'm hoping that in about 5 years' time, we got people at the education ministry in Tokyo scratching their heads saying, how did this happen? How have we got all these local children speaking such a high standard of English in this back of beyond place in Japan? How did that happen? We encourage a lot of emigration to the area. That's with not just Japanese people, but also overseas visitors or overseas people who just move to Japan. This happens in a number of ways. One is we're offering employment. Secondly, we offer a sort of open house in a way, so you can come and just test it out. And thirdly, I think just by having a vibrant community that's within our company and beyond our company, we know lots of other people in the area doing their own interesting things. It helps make a place attractive. I mean, you can have a physically attractive place, but if it's moribund as a society,
then there's nothing to do.
They'll go home after a while. Like get home back where they came from, or move on to somewhere else.
Oh, it's utterly fascinating. When I was in Japan last month, either side of my Basho walk, we spent time on the coast, so mostly around, obviously where the tsunami impacted most, and down to Fukushima. And obviously that's an extreme case of rural areas that have been devastated and no one's living there. And but even in, kind of the lesser affected areas, as we wandered around, we were just kind of, taking a train and finding somewhere to stay online. And, it was very, very haphazard, but we often would ask ourselves or ask each other, what would young people do here? What would get people to stay here? And, it seems like agriculture is like the only industry in a lot of those places, and that's probably not enough for all young people. And so, yeah, I can see that across Japan. I mean, that was where I was is probably an extreme case because, of course, a lot of people were moved out anyway, and now it's even harder to get them to move back. But this whole like rural issue I don't know, actually, it's a question. Is this an issue across Japan?
Yes, definitely.
Is anyone else doing stuff about it?
Yeah, I mean, well, some areas benefit from something. I know, was it a fortuitous moment? So, for example, Kumamoto Prefecture, they're building some enormous silicon wafer factories now because things are moving out of Taiwan, for example. So, there's parts of Kumamoto Prefecture, which is West Kyushu. So, from as the crow flies, maybe 150, 200 kilometers away from where we are at the moment. So, that area, it's going to be, very attractive to a lot of people. Wages that I know are going up. It's actually causing problems as well because people are working for the companies now. They're saying, well, I can get a better paid job with that company. But this is where inbound tourism can work very well. If you have visitors coming to an area, it can encourage others either to move back to their roots or move into the area where they see that they can earn a reasonable income and have maybe, generally speaking, a rural life can be a bit more leisurely. Maybe have more time with your family, spend more time with your family, not commuting on a crowded train or something for an hour in the morning and then in the evening. With the internet being very good in Japan as a whole, it completely changes the complexion of living in these sorts of areas. If I need something, well, we use Amazon or Rakuten, which is a Japanese equivalent. Bank online. I've got bank accounts in Hong Kong through the company, bank account in the UK, bank accounts in Japan. It doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
I can look at them all online. So problems that used to be faced in a more remote area, assuming you have pretty good internet connection, and such as we're doing now.
Exactly.
Each other, you're in the southern hemisphere, I'm in the northern hemisphere. So those issues, while I've been here, have been issues that might have made like I can't be in the country even if I want to be. I can't be because of these are largely being resolved. Inbound tourism has a big role to play in regenerating or helping to regenerate rural areas of Japan and probably any other country. They're not just peculiar to Japan. It's just what's different here is that most places in Japan are sort of reasonable. There's no extremes in terms of you go into the outback and maybe the outback looks the same for a long, long way.
It does. It's beautiful, but it does, yes.
Yeah. I'd love to go and do it. But Japan, every valley is different again.
Yes.
There's myriad islands, et cetera, et cetera. So in a sense, it's accessible sort of year round.
I can definitely vouch for what Paul says about every valley being different, especially after my experience walking in Tohoku in September, October this year. So I went on to ask Paul to tell me what he says to people who are coming to Japan and planning just to head to maybe Tokyo and Kyoto, the big sightseeing cities.
Perhaps if you're going to a rather crowded place, crowded with tourists, you're not really experiencing the best of Japan, even if that place is fantastic, gorgeous Japanese temple garden or wherever it might be. That isn't normal Japan, regular Japan. Most Japanese are probably not, outside of school trips, they've never been to those wonderful Japanese temple gardens in Kyoto. But Japan, regular Japan, is wonderful in a way that, most societies should be, but aren't necessarily so just because of the way that the culture is, the way that the people operate. It's a very friendly, open country. It doesn't mean to say that you're going to the regular spots in Japan, whether it's Tokyo, Kyoto, or skiing in Niseko or wherever it might be. You won't have the same experience. It's just that if you go into, I should call it more regular society, it's laid on thick. If you can get into it, it's extremely satisfying and, I don't know, very human. But in Japan, it really is, it's where humanity can come out really very well. And we all blossom through that. That's what I've seen on tours. People just blossom. Yeah, this is what we should all be. And of course, it's not like that. And tell you the truth, Japanese have their own stresses and things. It's not all, it's not all coming out roses here. But generally speaking, it tries to accommodate people, and especially visitors, and especially people from overseas. So as a white man in Japan, I've had a very privileged life in a way that most Japanese have not. So I feel extremely grateful. So all the more reason that I shouldn't take this for granted.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had the same experiences on this recent trip again, especially because we were out in very, much more rural areas than often I would have been. And my Japanese is pretty scratchy, but it was enough to have lots of interesting conversations and a couple of glasses of sake, and suddenly my Japanese is a lot better. And and the locals' English is suddenly better as well. And we had some absolutely, as you described it, just a real meeting of humanity, kind of let's all just have a chat kind of moments. Really, really special with the community project. So if I go on a Walk Japan walk, some of the proceeds of that walk go into supporting this.
Absolutely. I mean, Walk Japan is a wholly owned and managed company. We have no outside investors. We have very little debt. So we plow back as much into the business as possible. So that's into our staff training, developing tours, doing more with the community project, whatever that might be. Just today, I was interviewing somebody who's going to come on full time with the community project, which means by April next year, we should have 3 full-time people working on the project and some part-timers as well. With that, we'll be able to really take off. We want to start marketing. Rice doesn't really make a lot of money, but shiitake mushrooms is a high-value, low-weight product. So we want to market that and provide the story with it. So also you can see how we did it, how we do it with the locals, and all the rest of it. And so the community project is something we want to do because we think it's a worthwhile thing to do. We enjoy doing it. Secondly, I'm not saying all our potential customers are interested in that, but I think many are interested in a company that is trying to do something on a bigger scale than just for the shareholders.
For sure.
Also, Japan is suffering from a labor shortage. As a company, largely we don't have that problem. And it's partly because we have some very high quality people we're already working with and others who want to work with us. And from all walks of life. One of the most recent recruits, a gentleman who started his life off at the Bank of Japan and then worked at IMF and then was professor at a university. Now he's retired. And he said, I was writing like serious papers on inbound tourism, and I came across your company and I thought, now's the time to actually enact what I was writing about.
Wow, that's so cool.
We have all sorts of people working with us, and I think that in itself is attractive. So it's how to make a business sustainable. I mean, we do have a serious problem in that we use aeroplanes a lot. There's not much we can do about that, but beyond that, there's a lot we can do, and this is just one large element of our way of paying back into this. If it goes back to what my friend told me when I was an impecunious student back in the late 80s in Japan, one day it'll be your turn to pay it back. Your turn, and that's another way of, if you like, adding back into the social capital, if you like, society. There's all sorts of ways we're very, we've got our fingers in everything in a sense through all our colleagues. Amongst other things, we're providing a model for others in Japan and maybe elsewhere who either replicate in its entirety or take bits which they can apply to wherever they are, or just get inspiration to maybe move out of the city to the countryside, or move between city and countryside in their future life, if that's possible for them.
You see a lot of companies who are trying to give back to local communities, and often it'll be in lesser developed or less wealthy countries, and that feels a bit paternalistic and a bit colonialist. And there's all sorts of it's fraught, or they're very small companies and they don't quite make it. But you guys have been doing this for some years. You're doing it in a really useful and effective way. And it makes me feel extra good to, think to send people, yes, go and do a hike with Walk Japan, because there's all this beautiful flow and effect.
I think it is hard for an established business then to say, well, we need to do something. Well, what do we do?
Yes.
Okay, well, that looks interesting. Let's just bolt it on without having it really part of your DNA. This is part of Walk Japan's DNA.
Paul also told me that interest in Walk Japan's community project from its customers has really increased post-COVID, as well as walk bookings being up. Then more people are also coming to volunteer in Kunisaki or just asking more questions about the community project aspect, which I find very heartwarming. We do sort of hear rumours, unsubstantiated rumours, that people are trying to be more thoughtful in their travels these days. It's not just all revenge travel, but it's nice to hear something a bit more concrete. Anyway, that is it for episode 314 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed that chat with Paul. You can find out more about Walk Japan at walkjapan.com. And also in my previous episodes about this trip to Japan from September, October this year, which includes the episode about our actual walk for Walk Japan in the Tohoku region, which was episode 308. And I also mentioned early on about our Fukushima episode, episode number 310, which of course was another example of trying to revitalize tourism in rural Japan, which is, I think, a very good reason to go to Japan. As if you need a good reason. I love that country anyway, but it's an extra good reason and a way to be thoughtful on your trip there. Speaking of thoughtful, don't forget to join either our Facebook group or LinkedIn group for Thoughtful Travellers. There are links in the show notes, or just search for Thoughtful Travellers in either of those platforms. And the show notes for this episode will be at notaballerina.com/314. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.